Hello, everybody. Welcome to a special episode of the Big Home Ed Conversations. We are back with one of our favourite guests, Wendy Charles-Warner from Education Otherwise. We love having her on at the moment, especially because of obviously the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill that's going through Parliament. And we are very keen to make sure that from time to time, at least, we're checking in with what's happening, as it's so important to all of us to understand what's going on. And I think the truth is that whilst a lot of information is put out there on the various sort of Facebook groups and other areas, we do actually find it quite hard sometimes when we're busy and we're trying to just educate our kids and keep on top of life and actually live our lives and work and all things, to actually still keep this in the forefront of our minds and do the fighting that's necessary. Support those who are obviously putting the work in behind the scenes to really try and fight this. So obviously, without further ado, I will obviously let Wendy chat to us about it for a little bit, but we kind of wanted to touch specifically today on really kind of, it's gotten quite far through the process. There are definite fears that this will now come to pass, that we may not be able to fight all of it anymore, which is a shame. But ultimately, I think it's understanding, if it does come to pass, if these things do start to come into action, what do we think the reality might actually look like? And I guess, just trying to give people a picture to kind of just maybe put some fears to bed, or to make people aware of kind of their rights still, and any kind of things which we might need to still be pushing back on our local MPs and stuff about, to really try and push for better rights as things maybe do start to come into play. So that's what we want to try and chat about today. So hopefully that's going to be really helpful to all of you. But how are you today, Wendy? How are you getting on? I know you're suffering a little bit with your shoulder, bless you, but apart from that.
Yes, but I'm here, so that's a good thing. Hopefully we can help people to catch up.
Yeah.
And I think that the worries are raising and people are becoming fearful. And some of those fears are perhaps have some justification and others less so. But if I tell you where we are in the process, that might give us a good start. People will probably know that the bill has been through the House of Commons. Now, in the Lords, during debate, there have been comments about how it was bulldozed through, how it was railroaded through. And there was a definite impression that the Labour government was controlling the passage of the bill. There were no amendments made that were suggested other than by the government, the Welsh government, and the Department for Education. And that's really unusual on a bill. Bills normally get some amendments before they come into force. It's arrived at the Lords, and the process is very similar in the Lords. It first of all gets read, that's just a formality. You then have the second reading where there is a debate, and you then go to what's called committee stage. At the moment, we're in committee stage, and what I'm seeing, what I saw in debate, and what I'm seeing reading the transcripts for the committee stage, is a great many peers are actually very worried about this bill and are expressing their concerns. There are huge numbers of amendments. I've been working with some of the peers on amendments and various aspects of this, and I'm seeing really sensible amendments being put forward. And the tone of argument is quite unusual for the House of Lords. Normally it's very, very respectful, but the feelings are so high that I'm seeing people making asides against other peers, which you don't see as often as you see in the Commons. So clearly this bill has raised people's emotions, but there is a lot of, shall we say, negative feedback about the bill. There are a lot of amendments being proposed. There are a lot of peers who do not think that this bill should go through as it is. So that's actually helpful to us. We haven't yet reached the committee stage on the main sections of the bill which relate to home education. What we have seen is the initial discussions about the register per se. Now, as I said, I'm in touch with quite a few peers, and my feedback is that the register itself will go ahead. They are all saying exactly the same thing. They believe that the register will go ahead. But to be quite frank, the majority of parents in this country who home educate, their children are already on informal registers. So a simple register would not make a great deal of difference in practice. Emotionally, and feeling that it's not fair. Of course it makes a difference to all of us, but in practice a basic register would not make a difference. Now, it's the other aspects of the bill that would make the difference. And I'm being told that peers believe that there is a good chance of them amending, certainly lightening the amount of data that has to be provided. That's one thing that a lot of peers are not in agreement with. Even some peers who were very much in favour of the schools bill, which was the previous iteration, are asking for amendments. For example, Lord Storey, Mike Storey, has filed amendments to this bill, particularly asking for access to examinations for parents, which wasn't included. The support in the bill was negligible. So when you've got peers from all sides asking for amendments, I think that there is a good chance that some amendments will be made. And I'm hoping that when we get to the end of the process in the Lords, which we're looking at, the committee stage will probably continue. It could be into early July. It then goes to third reading for amendments to be made, and it then, from that stage, is sent back to the House of Commons. Now, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but having researched this, my understanding is that if the bill goes to the Commons with amendments and the Commons accept those amendments, then the bill will become a piece of legislation. It will become law. If the Commons do not accept the amendments, then it doesn't become law. They have to go back and ask the House of Lords to reconsider. But according to my basic research on this, they can't do that for 13 months.
Okay.
So if the Commons doesn't accept amendments from the Lords, there will be a delay with the bill. Now, we know that the Commons, this particular government, does not want a delay. This is one of their flagship bills. They do not want to delay it. And so it's a possibility that they will, shall we say, back down somewhat and accept amendments in order to get it through. But time will tell and we will see. But we are expecting sometime in the next week it should come to the stage where there's discussion of home education. I'm keeping track of it. The other thing you were saying, Kelly, is in practice, how is this going to affect people? So if we look at the worst case scenario, that's the bill goes through exactly as it is. Every parent would be required to provide their local authority, first of all, to register under threat of quite serious punishment, and secondly, to provide their local authority with an awful lot of information. Now let's look at the practicalities of that. First of all, the local authorities don't have the funds to process that amount of information. Even if they do manage to process that information, they don't have storage facilities. So parents are sending things in on paper rather than email. They just don't have the facilities to store thousands of tons of paperwork.
No.
And if they are processing that information and they decide that it's not good enough, and somewhere down the road, the parent ends up in a courtroom solely because they haven't provided this information, I cannot imagine a court finding a parent guilty of failure to provide a suitable education on the basis that they didn't give Mr. Jones's details in full, who happens to be one of the children's tutors. I simply cannot imagine the judiciary doing that. So I think they're probably buying themselves a rather large problem that they haven't thought about how they're going to address.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one aspect. So I think in practice, a lot of local authorities won't be quite as officious as people are scared that they will be about information.
I suppose the risk with this, I think, comes from the people who maybe the local authority are concerned about for some other reason, that the amount of pressure put on those parents to provide this information. I guess, yes, okay, for some of us, it might just simply be a nod, great, good, carry on. Like, we don't want 20,000 tons of paperwork, thank you, please don't submit loads of stuff to us. We'll review it again in a couple of years. But ultimately, for those of us who, in the community, maybe who've been through, obviously, social services investigations in the past, as we've discussed before. Won't necessarily touch on that too much, but the concept of families who maybe have had some issues in the past, they may come under such serious scrutiny with this, like local authorities having the permission to ask for this information, that actually it becomes very difficult for a family to prove to a local authority that everything's great and everything's fine at home. And it, obviously, when a child is in a situation that has maybe been vulnerable and the parents have been working very hard to try and like put really amazing safeguarding things into place, they may be getting people out of their lives, they're trying to ensure they've got access to all these amazing clubs and groups and things, they're trying to do whatever they can to support that child and to get their confidence up, their whatever, right? Whatever situation they might be in, send child who's had trauma at school, whatever has been going on, that potentially opens them up to such a lot more kind of, I don't know, just that microscopic looking at their life, which I think it's just such a shame that we are still in a situation in this country where the government basically want to have this oversight, and that there's just no trust, that families are trying to do the best by their families. And I think ultimately it's a shame, isn't it, that they're even asking for this much information from anyone, that it's actually completely unnecessary. But yeah, carry on. It's just such a shame, I think.
Yes, I think the people who are going to find this bill affecting them are those parents who, sometimes through no fault of their own, who have ended up with scrutiny by Children's Social Services. And I think the aspect of the bill that to me is most severely inappropriate is the best interest. The best interest clauses. So your education could be absolutely perfect, but if the Children's Social Services are investigating you, you're not even on the child protection plan, they're investigating you, they can decide whether or not home education is in your best interest. Now, there are an awful lot of local authorities where they have a block standing order in effect that any child who has children's services involved, it's not in their interest to be home educated. They simply do not understand that home education is of equal status to school. And there is this notion that school protects children. It simply doesn't. And it's not well known that I was a victim of abuse when I was a child in a school, and school certainly did nothing to protect me. I have members of my family who were very severely abused in school, and nobody in school protected them. And I know thousands of parents who can say exactly the same thing. You've got this difficulty that there's this notion, hairy-fairy notion, that school is protective and that children are safer in school. What the best interest clauses do by giving the social services that right is they take away the idea that if the education is good, then the education should stand, because the consistency is the most important for the child, because a child under assessment needs the security of familiarity to be able to cope. I see lots of families who have been through the court system who are very badly damaged by the number of professional assessments that they have been forced to go through. Children who are actually doing less well at the end of the process than they were at the beginning. And it's known, there is good quality research that confirms that Children's Social Services involvement can be iatrogenic. It can do more harm than it's designed to do good. And we should be aware of that. Now, what I'm seeing within the House of Lords, where the bill currently is that peers are aware of that. They do understand that. And there are several amendments that have been put forward to try to address that. And to be fair, if this bill were reduced to that best interest clause clicks in when a child is actually on a child protection plan, it would be very hard to argue against that.
Yeah, I agree.
But the fact that it's kicking in at the point of investigation, I think, goes too far. And that is exactly what I'm hearing from a lot of peers. People who've been following things that are happening online or in your podcasts and things like that will find that they're spotting things about expert opinions. Now, the British Rabbinical Union has taken an advice about the bill, and their advice is that there are aspects of it which can be successfully challenged in judicial review. The first advice obtained was by Education Otherwise. We obtained an advice from David Wolf, KC. Now, David Wolf is in the field, is rated the second highest in the country. This is not a man who does not know what he's talking about. And David's advice is that those best interest clauses in the bill would be challengeable in judicial review. And we were a lone voice saying that initially. But now, as I say, the British Rabbinical Union has picked that up. And the Christian Institute. The Christian Institute instructed senior counsel to do a similar advice. And they have come back with very similar advice. That is, that those clauses simply are not able to stand if you challenge them. So there are other advices out there as well. So we have a range of very senior lawyers whose field this is, telling the government, and these documents have been sent to the government, that if you go ahead with those clauses, you will face challenges from all of these sides in court. Now, most usually a government faced with that sort of information would think about it and make some adjustment. They wouldn't give those objecting what they want, but most usually they would adjust just enough to not be liable for a loss in court, because that would be a real loss of face to them. But here we have a government that appears to be dismissive. There was a march in London a few days ago. Something like, I think it was well over 1,000 people attended the march, and it was dismissed by the minister as a few scant attendees. We're not going to change. We are determined to put this through as it stands, and we're not going to change our minds because of some scantily attended march. I don't think that over 1,000 people marching to object is a scantily attended march. When you look at how tiny our community is, that's actually quite a highly attended march. Now, that's something families can do. We are being dismissed as just flies in the ointment. And we're nuts to be swatted. So if you can sort of tell people, talk to people, take part in the sorts of things that are going on locally to you, just to make sure that we are not a scant audience, and that it's understood. That might just get a bit more attention. It's certainly beginning to get the attention of the media. And the most influential people on government tend to be media, because media can affect their votes.
It can, and I think they don't want the media suddenly cracking down on them, because then they're going to suddenly be like, oh, hang on, like this changes everyone's opinion, doesn't it? At the end of the day, not all of us, hopefully those of us with some critical thinking are always asking our own questions, but for the masses, the media backup is super important. And I think quite often, I know that in home educating communities, we can be a little fearful of talking to the media, because obviously they do tend to spin things their own way. So obviously definitely put caution to the wind when you're talking to them. Not the opposite. But be cautious when you're talking to them if you do decide to talk to them. But ultimately, it is obviously important for us to be all shouting from the rooftops about how much home education matters as it stands and how important it is to us as a community. And I think what's really interesting is that all of this is coming off the back of several years of distinct growth in the home education community, that the government is recognising that there are a lot of parents who are, with access to more information, making better choices for their families that suit them and also obviously respond to the needs of their children. Whereas I think a lot of people would have felt at one stage that they didn't really have a choice, that they were just going to have to keep forcing their kid into school and just trying to do their best with it. But I think a lot of families are recognising, maybe because they're able to work more flexibly from home, maybe because of whatever reason, that actually they're able to provide this opportunity. And I think what's frustrating when we kind of look at, again, this kind of idea of swatting us away, that we're just a few people, a few voices, 1,000 people turning up for a march saying, please stop trying to control what we're trying to do, that we are genuinely really working hard for our families and we care an awful lot about our kids, and we want you to see us as good people, that we're genuinely just good people who want to raise our children really well and to give them great opportunities. And this kind of dismissive, oh, there's just a few people who are trying to push back against us. And it's like, well, yes, but we are the people that you are there to serve at the end of the day. Like, we are part of the fabric of the culture in this country, that we still exist. We're still a part of it, and actually a relatively powerful part of it when we put our heads together, because we're all so strong-minded and do a lot of critical thinking and do an awful lot of investigating. And we don't just lie down and take whatever gets thrown at us. And I honestly, if they want to underestimate us, then they can do that at their peril, I think, frankly. But yeah.
I think that's the case. But one thing I've been seeing within the community that's worrying me is quite often when people are fearful, they become quiet and back off and don't get involved. People refer to it as people putting their heads in the sand, but I think that's not really what it is. It's fear. It's not, I'm going to just ignore this and it will go away. It's fear. And if you don't speak up in your own way, then that's fewer voices being heard. For example, every single petition we've ever put out is very carefully worded. We actually get MPs and peers to work on them with us. And usually we put out a petition and it's got tens of thousands of signatures within a matter of a few days. We put out a petition on this bill, which was actually designed to trigger a particular response from the government, being, well, we don't want to pay for all of this extra support you're going to demand for us. We've got to give this a thought. And it's still only on 20-something thousand signatories. Now, at 100,000 signatures, there has to be a debate about it in the House of Commons. So trigger a debate. Now, we've got about 120,000 home educated children. That's about 60 odd home educating parents. All of them have got relatives and friends. All of them could sign that. We could be at 100,000 signatures within a matter of days. And yet we haven't. And it's not that people aren't wanting to object. I think it's the fear of getting something wrong. And you also have fear which is instilled within the community because people are hearing lots of things being said that they're not sure it's right because they've been bombarded from all directions. And so they don't know what to do. They become frozen. So I think it would be really helpful if people could sort of take a deep breath and try to overcome that fear. You're not going to be harmed by doing what you need to do. It's not going to make a difference to you as an individual negatively, but every voice counts. You cannot build a house without hundreds and hundreds of bricks. You can't grow a tree without thousands of molecules. And we are all those building blocks of the objection against the things that are wrong. So things such as, if there's a march by you, go along if you feel able. Talk to your MP. It's gone past the House of Commons, but there is insurrection currently in the ranks, the current government ranks. And if your MP happens to be concerned that this isn't good, they've had to follow with the voting because of the whip. But they might raise enough concerns that perhaps it might just be that amendments coming from the Lords will be good and will be accepted. If you know anybody who's in the media, speak to them about how this will affect you and why you're frightened by it. If you know anybody in the House of Lords, speak to them. If you would like to send your story about how this bill would affect you and how frightened you are, send it to Education, otherwise we can pass it on to one of the relevant peers for you. Or you can contact them directly. Lord Way, Nat Way, is collecting stories. He won't use them all. Lord Lucas, would be happy to collect stories and he will use those that he can. So there are things you can do and we can pass that on for you if needs be. Now, I think another really important thing to do is try not to be fearful. For the majority of parents, this bill, if it goes through exactly as it is, it will cause an inconvenience, but it should not affect how you are able to home educate your child. For those parents who are going under Children's Services investigation, there is a lot of support out there. There's a lot of it. The trick there is to take a deep breath and say, I know my education is fabulous. Continue to educate. Now, I ought to come to something, Kelly, that parents are contacting us currently asking, what will happen to me if I refuse to comply because I'm not going to comply? Now, As a legal professional, I can't advise anyone to not abide by the law. As a charity, we cannot advise anyone to not abide by the law. But what we can do is explain to parents what would happen if they didn't, so that they can make their own choices. It's not our place to make parents' choices for them.
Of course not, yeah.
And if you were to say, no, I am not going to send you 60 odd pieces of information every fortnight about everybody I use, then realistically, what is going to happen? In that scenario, the chance of the local authority prosecuting you simply on that basis isn't very high. And if they do, yet your education is absolutely fabulous, and you've provided information to the local authority about how fabulous your education is, I cannot imagine a court finding the parent guilty, as I said earlier on. The other question we're being asked is, what if I refuse to register? Well, right now, there are people who are not on their local authority informal registers. These are informal registers. And there are some parents who are not known to their local authority. Now, the number not known to their local authority is actually an awful lot smaller than the number who think they're not known to their local authority, because people will say they're not known to their local authority because they've deregistered a child from school, but the local authority perhaps hasn't been in touch with them. But they are still known to their local authority. And the situation, if you didn't register, would be exactly the same. If the local authority located you, having not known about you, if you hadn't registered, the only difference might be they might be a bit quicker to serve a notice to satisfy. If it happened now, they would ask you for information, and if they didn't like it, serve a notice to satisfy. So effectively, you're in the same position as you always were. Now, this is one of the things we've been telling government about the bill. I happen to know, and I'm sorry to use this as an analogy, I'm only using the form of registration as an analogy. I do not compare home educating parent to this cohort. I happen to know the statistics for the sex offenders register because it's something I analysed. Now, this is the most crucial register to protect children and adults in this country from sex offenders. Yet there are hundreds and hundreds of sex offenders for whom the police have no clue where they are and who have disappeared, and simply their names on a register, but nobody knows where they are. So if the police, who have got phenomenal resources for keeping track of offenders, serious offenders, cannot keep track of those offenders, how is some poor local authority officer who does not have those resources going to hunt down and find every single home educator who's not already on the list? It's unrealistic to think that much.
Diabolical.
So what happens there is those parents, those amongst the community who are open and decent and honest and caring and just want to get on with everyone, will say, oh, well, I'm going to just carry on as I am, talking to my local authority. Those equally honest and decent and caring parents who are just not known to their local authority aren't going to put their hand up and say, register me, please, because it comes with possible punishment. And who volunteers for that? So if they're already not known, they're not going to come forward. Now, we then look at the tiny, tiny little cohort, and it is tiny. In every cohort, you have bad apples. That happens everywhere in the world. So even if it's only one or two very bad apples, those are the bad apples a register will never find.
No.
So
they're not going to volunteer themselves, are they? I mean, I think they're not going to want any more investigations. They're just going to hide for as long as they can possibly get away with, aren't they?
Of course they are. And so this register's not going to do what it achieves. And I think that I think the register will come into place from the feedback I'm receiving. I don't think the next government will remove the register per se, because it has got cross-party support. But I think that that time will tell that this is not going to work as it's supposed to work. So even if it comes in, come the next election, I doubt we'll have the same government as things are looking. And come the next election, chances are this will be changed. So you've got lots of different things happening. And I think the answer is, I don't think much will happen to you different to what happens now if you do refuse to register. But I cannot advise you not to register because I cannot advise you not to break the law.
I suppose at the end of the day, once it comes into force, if it does, then there will obviously be parameters explained to us that if we do not, then these potential punishments may be put in place. And I think what's always really fascinating to me is that if they actually stopped to talk to home educators a little and actually understood a little bit about our ethos, they may understand that actually reward and punishment is not something that we particularly adhere to or appreciate or like our children to be involved in. And ultimately, this kind of concept of do as you're told or else you'll be punished is not really something that we particularly enjoy the concept of anyway. But actually, if they really thought about that for a minute and thought, why don't they agree with this? Why don't they actually appreciate this kind of behaviour? And they thought to themselves, why is it that home educators aren't speaking to local authority? Why aren't they just saying, like, this is what we're choosing to do? Well, it's because of this, isn't it? Or again, looking at their own behaviours, looking at what they've been doing to the home education community over history and what that actually has caused. And the distrust and the fact that actually people would like, ultimately, to lead their lives in a way that suits them without loads of oversight. And equally, the other thing as well that kind of popped into my head as you were speaking is that kind of the concept of catching flies with threat of death is not going to make anybody happy. But if you put some honey out, then all of a sudden you have lots of flies. And ultimately, I literally on our last podcast episode, we were talking about the concept of how essentially the government are very concerned, it seems, that home educated children are not receiving the same standard of education. Let's argue about that another time. As children in schools, fine, that's their strange opinions. But ultimately, they then are not at all willing to put their money or resources or any kind of expertise where their mouth is. If they're sitting there saying, we're concerned that they're not receiving it, and then we put a petition through to try and say, well, can you give us access to examinations? Can we get some of the funds that you'd normally pay to schools so that we can claim for educational resources for our children or trips or days out? Nope, if you decide to home educate, you're on your own. But if I'm on my own, then why do you get to criticize me for not being able to pay for my child to go to tennis? Like, if you want all children to be able to have access to a maths GCSE, then please do ensure that my child has access to a maths GCSE then, please. And it's just it's so ironic. I just don't understand how they can stand in government ranting about how you've got all these potential children at risk of not receiving a good quality education. £1,000 a year is going into a school if a child goes to school to pay for their place in that school per year. And as a family, I've got 2 school-aged children. If I was receiving £16,000 a year to spend on their education, my goodness, like the quality that I could offer them for that is just unreal. And I think what's shocking is that obviously we have schools which have these massive overheads. You've got all of this staff to pay for, all the resources to pay for, all these examinations to pay for, all whatever's, right? That clearly that money doesn't go very far. It doesn't actually manage to create a great environment for the teachers, the children, the school quality of the building. All of it is deteriorating. Whereas, as I say, £16,000 for one family to make an amazing... And then that gives a parent the opportunity to choose. Do I go to work? Or do I stay home and parent my children and raise them and educate them, provide them with a fantastic kind of opportunity, even if that money has to be put under some sort of, like, you send them receipts and they refund you for things so that you're not just spending it on random rubbish, whatever. But yeah, I honestly think that it would just make such a massive difference and would allow parents to honestly make a good choice for their family if it made sense. And honestly, I'm just sort of like spitballing kind of ideas here, but the irony behind it really is just not lost on me. It's really frustrating that we are sitting here going, you are concerned that we're not doing it. You want to fine us, potentially imprison us if we do not do exactly what you want us to do. But you are not interested in actually helping us. Not truly. That's not interest. That's not an interest of yours. And that's what really frustrates me more than anything else, I think, is that.
I think the fee for a single exam entry last year was something like £62 for an external candidate. And when we've raised this with the government, the responses we've received have been, well, we don't want to encourage home education, and if we pay for things, it'll encourage it. But actually, if you look at cases where government do pay monies to home educating families. That isn't the case at all. Tasmania, a friend of mine is Tasmanian, and in Tasmania, a parent who's on a low income can claim means tested benefit, our equivalent of means tested and unemployment benefits. If they're home educating, they don't have to demonstrate that they're looking for work or look for work, because their work is the child's home education. And whilst that's only sort of a very modest amount of money, it's benefits money, it means that parents who are on a low income or have no employment can actually educate their children in the knowledge that they're not going to be forced to go back into work. And that has worked incredibly well, and it hasn't increased the number of children coming to home education, from what I'm advised, so that you can give benefits. And actually, in Wales during COVID, the government gave £200 per home educated child to the local authority to spend as each local authority felt fit to benefit home educated children. And I had people ringing the helpline saying, I'm not known to the local authority. How can I contact them? Because they're giving away free this, that, and the other. And so we had people actually wanting to be known to the local authority because they wanted this. Now, we had a situation in Wales where we have 22 local authorities, and there was not a single local authority that would have gone on my red list on our RAG rating. They were all, in general terms, Welsh local authorities were considered with respect and considered to be positive toward parents. Then after COVID, and the government stopped that, and we went to trying to introduce more draconian measures, and they issued new guidance. It was more than a year ago now. They issued new guidance saying effectively it was mandatory to have meetings, and we monitored after that the effect on people's opinions of their local authority and the number of parents not known and families not known to local authorities. And we found that whereas previously we had all green rated, which was considered good, 2 of them had gone into red, and nearly all of the South Wales authorities had gone into amber. And in North Wales, where we have a conglomerate which is absolutely fabulous, they do really perform well. They all remained green, and in fact their positivity rating went up. So where the government has introduced draconian measures that aren't agreed with by home educators, relationships between parents and local authorities become worse. And we've seen this in overseas as well, where there is good quality research that found that where measures similar to those being introduced by this government are introduced against the wishes of the population, the unknowns to the local authorities actually rocket. So one particular state where that happened a few years ago, there was an estimate of 10 to 15% unknown, and the academic estimate is now 80%. So we've got this strange idea that you threaten parents and it makes them behave, whereas actually you threaten home educators, who are the most feisty cohort of individuals I know. What happens? They say, nope, we're not going to do this. And I think the idea that it's in 1870, the government decided that threats of fines and punishment would make parents send their children to school. Every single government since has used threats of fines and punishment to try to force parents to send their children to school. And from 1870 right through to nearly 1980, it was the mid-1970s, the percentage of children not going to school was identical, no matter how much those threats of punishment increased. You would have thought government would have learned from that, wouldn't you?
And I think what's interesting is they've obviously recently pushed those fines up and stuff as well, and made even more pressure onto parents. And actually what's happening is parents are going, okay, do you know what? I'm just putting them out then. I'm just deregistering them. Like if they can't get there and you're just going to keep fining me, they can't be there because the quality of the schooling isn't there, the SEND provisions aren't there, my child is being bullied relentlessly, they're at risk of doing all kinds of horrible things to themselves. I am absolutely not sending them anymore, so fine, I'm just going to have to deregister and find another way. Whether that's temporary or not, like whether their plan is to get them back into school or not. But ultimately, I think what's really frustrating again, though, listening to that, is the kind of concept again of governments thinking, well, I don't want more home educators. We don't want more people to deregister. Why not? Why not? And I think, like, when we're looking at how there's a lot of talk as well in the government as well at the moment about kind of making sure that there's more childcare, like more funded hours available for younger ages. They want mothers back at work earlier. They want children in school earlier in the day and having their breakfast clubs. They want them, you know what I mean? Like all of these things which just like take them away more from their family environment so the parents can work more. And it's just like, well, actually, if you actually cause families to live these really segmented different lives and everyone's super busy and super stressed and just trying to make money and trying to get through the week every single week, all you're seeing is this massive mental health crisis. I mean, we've got all these things are connected, but it really is so shocking that so many of us can see it, but the government just seem to be just being like, nope, I'm not seeing it, got my blinkers on, like it's not our fault. No, we just need to carry on as we are. It's too expensive to change it, too difficult to change it, whatever the concept is. Ultimately, if you gave families a choice and you said, like, you either can go back to work or after your maternity pay finishes, there will be X amount of funds available to you if you can prove that you are providing a quality home environment for your child and providing them with these amazing opportunities, or you'd have access to a fund that would allow you to either, that childcare fund is either to send them to a nursery or you can claim it as a parent to cover activities and things that you want to organise individually, like say you want to put them into some clubs or classes or get them an early tutor or whatever you might want to do. Like, but actually, if you said you can claim that money for you or you can pay it to a childcare provider, same as you can send them to school or you can claim that money and you can support them at home, what's the problem? And we know what the problem is, don't we, really? I mean, it comes down to agenda, it comes down to messaging and the fact that they want, obviously, most of us to go through a school and get the same messaging and come out of it the same. And they worry about, obviously, the potential different routes that humankind will go on, the different tangents we may end up following with our belief systems.
Parallel societies.
Yeah. But I think why can't it be considered as actually, we're not all going to end up so staunchly different that we can't get along or can't work together or can't achieve amazing outcomes as a human community, that maybe actually what that would create is more community. Like, I don't know, I just find it quite odd that we can't possibly think of it in a positive way, that people having different ideas and beliefs is actually a great thing. I think, is it John Holt who talks about like the death of the sort of innovation in America, where people kind of went there looking for a new life and new opportunity, and they were all coming up with these great ideas and everyone was considered an equal, and that was what the kind of the foundings of America was supposed to be. Then kind of compulsory schooling came in and completely destroyed it. It's like that. It's so interesting, I think, that we just seem to have such a negative idea of difference in all of the different capacities in life, whether it be disability, race, age, that there's so many negative stigmas attached to everything, and instead of just actually having some, like, I don't know, potential, seeing the potential.
I could go on for ages about our social othering. It's something that it's rife within our society, and you see it. If you look at gangs, that's what's used when you're teaching students who are doing sociology degrees. You teach them about othering. Gangs are used as an example. So if you live in this particular street, you are part of this gang. And if you live in the next street, you are somehow different. You're sometimes other. And therefore you are lesser, and therefore we are against you. And that othering is something that trying to funnel everybody through one mass channel actually creates, because then what it does is it says if you are not mainstream and following the same channel, you are somehow different and somehow lesser. And actually, we have a need for an Equality Act because we have developed a society where equality is frowned upon, because anything that is not very much mainstream and regular is different. And we see it in every community. And I think that where you look at societies where difference is celebrated and is promoted, you actually have societies which have better outcomes. So you take the average entrepreneur is not somebody who has been mainstream during their school years. The average entrepreneur who has achieved great things, take a look at Richard Branson, is somebody who's had a quirky background, who's been a bit different, who's gone through a slightly different route, and who has never quite, they've always been that square peg in the round hole. Society should actually encourage square peg and not try to knock their corners off, because those square pegs are the people who are innovative. And to be fair, when you look at home education, they're square, they're triangular, they're hexagonal. We have all manner of pegs. And the main rise in home educated numbers has been driven in the last couple of years by those families whose children are not coping in school. They are the square peg people. And those square pegs are coming to us, not because the parent wants to home educate, because most parents start off thinking, I'll send my child to school, we'll have 2.2 children, etc., because it's a social expectation. But it's because the school isn't catering for the child in the way that the parent feels is right for the child. And so they come to home education. So the last thing we want is government saying, well, we want your home education to look like your child is in the same classroom that's broken their edges. We don't want that. We want those and triangular and multifaceted people, because society does not thrive without them. But I'm afraid this is it's in my view, it's more to do with ideology than it is with the best interests of children.
Yeah.
And very much coming back to the bill, the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, what a dreadful title. Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill is not based on children's best interests. It's based on ideology, political ideology, that this particular government has been waiting to implement since during the whole period it hasn't been in government. And they are so doggedly determined to try to implement this that they are not listening to reason, to ordinary people saying to them, look, this will not work because, look, you need to amend this. And what I'm hoping is that although the respect from this particular government for peers in the House of Lords is not as great as I believe it should be, because of their expertise, I think that they should listen. They should listen. These are people who most peers have got a lot of life experience. They have the time to investigate and listen to what people are saying to them. They're not busy working MPs who have to do their surgeries and what have you. They are people who are dedicated to actually doing what they do in the House of Lords. And I think they can be much more considered. So if the government listens to what the House of Lords is saying you want to amend, with luck, the House of Lords will make those amendments, which will make this bill rather less unpalatable than it is. I'm not suggesting it will be palatable, but I'm saying it could be a lot less palatable and still achieve what the government hopes it will achieve. And a final note, I would like to just reiterate, this bill is not going to save a single child's life. I have yet to find a child who lost their life because they were home educated. And even if there were those children, which there are not, this bill, a register, sending in lots of documentation, would never make a difference to any single child. So calling it a children's wellbeing bill is just fanciful.
Yeah. And I think also it emphasizes in its own way that this is almost the tip of the iceberg, that if they want to start making some changes, that this is the first step for them in trying to put more well-being things into practice. And I think one of the things I always kind of liken it to is, say, for example, it was about criminals. Like, obviously it's not at all. Like, we are not criminals as home educating parents whatsoever. But like, if you were to say, right, I want everyone to simply put themselves on a register and tell us that they are not a criminal. And it's just like, okay, does that reassure you? No. Okay, so we want a letter from them all now to say that they're not a criminal. Okay, here you go. Here's my letter. I'm not a criminal. Does that reassure you? No. It doesn't do anything to then, and then they're just going to go further and further. And I think that the goal is for us, for sure. And I know that it can feel very scary when we do push back on these things. But as I say, just to kind of re-emphasize what Wendy said earlier, whatever you feel capable of doing, whether it is sending your thoughts and opinions to someone like Education Otherwise to then use those how they're being used with the Lords, whether it's to put something on social media, to do a video with your kids, to put some word out there, whatever you feel like you want to do or need to do, go to a march, send a letter to your MP, just speak up, just say what you're feeling, even if you're reiterating the exact same thing as the people around you. Like, even if it is the exact same thing. I think there's some open letters going around as well where people have written something and you can just sign your name to it and say, yes, I agree with this too. Just do something. And obviously talking to your family, talking to your friends, letting people know that these things are a thing and that actually this affects children in school.
Yes.
And it affects them in their future. People may have a child who is starting reception year 1, year 2, and they're doing okay right now. But in a few years' time, they might want to home educate them and actually find themselves finding that tricky because of new regulations. So it matters to all of us with children to actually maintain the rights of a parent to parent their own children. And I think we just have to always come together and support each other and fight for that when we can. But thank you so much, Wendy, for coming on and telling us more about it. It's definitely cleared a lot up for me and helped me to really think about this a bit better as well. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you for the adorable contributions of your little dog as well. Bless you. So you're wrestling with on your lap several times where they just shush. Oh, bless you. So apologies. But it was quite good fun. But I've loved having a lovely conversation with you again. So thank you so much for your time, and I'm wishing you a wonderful rest of your day.
For anyone out there, if you're worried, you're welcome. Ring our helpline. It's 0300 124 5690. If you are concerned and you're not sure, you can always ring the helpline, and we will give you the answers. That we may not be able to resolve every problem, but we will help you and signpost you if we can't. So just do that. There is someone there to talk to. Lovely. Thank you, Ken.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.